The old theater had been closed for 7 years, its velvet seats collecting dust, its golden railings tarnished by time and neglect. Marcus passed it every morning on his walk to the diner, where he worked as a cook, and he'd never once thought to look inside. He was the kind of man who kept his eyes down, who'd learned long ago that curiosity only complicated things. Life had taught him to move through the world quietly, taking up as little space as possible. That changed on a Tuesday morning in September when he heard the sound. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a faint, desperate cry echoing from somewhere behind the theater's boarded-up entrance. Marcus hesitated. It was already 5 minutes late for his shift, and the manager, Frank, had warned him about tardiness. But something in that sound, raw and terrified, wouldn't let him walk away. He found a gap in the weathered boards and squeezed through. The lobby was dark and suffocating, the air thick with decades of abandonment. There, slumped against the concession counter, was a young girl, maybe 14, wrapped in a tattered cloth that barely covered her thin frame. Her face was blue-tinged, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps that seemed to be getting worse, not better. "I can't breathe," she cried, her small hands clutching at her chest. "Please, I can't breathe." Marcus stood frozen for only a moment. Without thinking, he crossed the distance between them and knelt beside her. His own breathing remained steady as he gently removed the cloth from around her shoulders. What he saw made his heart stop cold. Beneath the covering was a girl covered in fresh cigarette burns and bruises. Her collarbone protruded sharply against paper-thin skin, and her eyes held a terror so profound it seemed to age her beyond years. But worse than the physical marks was the absolute desperation in her expression. The way she flinched when he reached toward her, as if expecting another blow. Marcus had seen darkness in his life. He'd made mistakes that would haunt him forever. But he'd never been able to ignore suffering when it was placed directly before him. This was different from abstract knowledge of the world's cruelty. This was real, immediate, and demanding. Hey, he said softly, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's breathing was still shallow, still rapid. "Sarah," she whispered. "My name is Sarah." "Okay, Sarah. I'm Marcus. You're safe now." "I need you to try something for me. Can you breathe in through your nose for 4 counts? Just 4. Can you do that?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Together, they did the breathing exercise in 4-4, hold 4-4, out 4-4. Her panic attacks slowly subsided, replaced by exhausted sobs that racked her fragile body. Marcus sat with her in that dark theater for 2 hours. He learned that Sarah had run away from a foster home 5 days ago, the 4th one in 3 years. She'd been living on the streets, and yesterday, a man had found her and brought her to the theater, promising shelter in exchange for labor. When she tried to leave this morning, he'd come back, and that's when the beating started. She'd hidden in the theater's basement when he went out, terrified and alone. By the time Frank called, looking for Marcus, demanding to know where he was, Marcus had already made his decision. He called the police from the lobby and reported what he'd found. He told them everything, knowing it would mean more questions, more complications. He would lose his job, would be tied up in reports and investigations. But as Sarah's breathing gradually stabilized and the first hints of trust began to form in her tear-stained eyes, Marcus realized none of that mattered. The investigation that followed was intense. Marcus was questioned for hours. The detective seemed suspicious of why he was there in the first place, what his interest was in a runaway girl. But his straightforward answers and calm demeanor eventually convinced them of his genuine concern. The man who'd kept Sarah was arrested. Child Protective Services was called. Frank did fire Marcus from the diner, just as expected. Said he couldn't have employees who couldn't show up for their shifts. Marcus packed his things without argument. What surprised him was when, 3 days later, Frank called him back. The detective had spoken to Frank about what Marcus had done. Frank's tone had changed completely. He offered Marcus his job back, plus a raise, plus flexible hours if he needed time to help with what happened to Sarah. But the greatest change came in Marcus himself. Something inside him had shifted during those hours in the dark theater. The weight he'd carried for so long, guilt, shame, the belief that he was fundamentally bad began to feel lighter. Realize that redemption wasn't something you achieved all at once. It wasn't a destination you reached. It was a direction you chose, moment by moment. Choice by choice, Sarah was placed with a new foster family, one carefully selected by her caseworker. She started attending school again and seeing a therapist. Marcus visited her weekly, bringing books and sometimes just sitting quietly while she did homework. Slowly, the terror began to fade from her eyes and was replaced with something that looked like hope. 6 months later, Sarah gave a victim impact statement at the court hearing. She spoke about the man who'd hurt her. Yes, but she also spoke about Marcus. She talked about how his calm voice had brought her back from the edge of panic, how his presence had shown her that not everyone in the world was cruel. She told the court that Marcus had given her the most precious thing anyone could give, proof that kindness still existed. When she finished, she looked directly at Marcus in the gallery, and she smiled. It was small and still uncertain, but it was real. That smile, more than anything else in Marcus's life, felt like grace. Years later, when people asked Marcus why he'd gone into that abandoned theater, why he'd spent hours helping a stranger instead of protecting his job, he never had a good answer. He just knew that sometimes the universe gives you a choice that seems impossible in the moment, but becomes the most obvious decision in hindsight. He'd chosen to stop walking with his eyes down. He'd chosen to see the suffering in front of him and respond with his whole heart. Sarah kept in touch after she aged out of foster care. She became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children in similar circumstances. And whenever people asked her how she found her purpose, she told them about a man named Marcus, who'd taught her the most important lesson of all, that one person's kindness can redirect an entire life. That sometimes, when you feel like you can't breathe, all you need is someone to remind you how.